Hi, everyone. Welcome to our conversation today with two sensational authors, Sierra Greer and Sylvia Park. I'm your chair, Dr. Anna McFarlane, and I'm a lecturer in fantasy literature at the University of Glasgow, where I teach on our master's course in fantasy, among other things. And I'm just obviously really delighted to be here today to introduce you to our authors and chat to them about their amazing novels. So I'll just give you a couple of introductions so that you know who we're speaking to, and then I'll let the authors take it away and you can tell us a bit about your books in more detail. So our first author is Sierra Greer, who's here to talk about her novel Annie Bot. Sierra grew up in Minnesota and attended Williams College and Johns Hopkins universities. She's a former high school English teacher, which might be something interesting to think about like the way that different people receive our texts and novels. But yeah, we'll get into that. And she writes about the future from her home in rural Connecticut. Annie Bot, the novel we're here to talk about today, has recently been shortlisted for the Arthur C. Clarke Award. So congratulations, Sierra.
Thank
Um,
you.
and yeah, you're very exciting news. And it's also received a number of other honours. It's been in the Book of the Month Club for a load of different venues, The Guardian, The Times, Amazon. Um, and one of the things that attracted me most to this novel was one of the pull quotes on the front, which says that it's Barbie for girls who love Aphex Twin. How could you not want to pick that up? So that's Sierra's bio. I'll introduce Sylvia as well, and then I'll ask you to talk about the books a bit. So we're here to talk as well about Luminous by Sylvia Park, which is more recently released, I think, than Anibot, but it's also already been received with so many amazing reviews in lots of different venues. So Sylvia is the author of the novel Luminous. They've taught creative writing at Kansas University, Oberlin, the University of Utah's Asia campus, and NYU. Their fiction won the 2018 Fiction Prize from the Sonora Review and was chosen as a finalist for the 2019 Black Warrior Review contest. And their stories have been published in Black Warrior Review, Tor.com, Best American Science Fiction and Fantasy, and many other places. And yeah, as I was having a look around, I saw that in his review of Luminous in The Guardian, Adam Roberts described the book as the arrival of a major new voice in SF. So amazing to be getting those kind of reactions from the book already when it's only out not so long. So thank you both so much for coming today, and I'm really excited to talk to you obviously about how your books overlap. But before, like, some people joining the event, they might not have read your books before. So I was kind of hoping that maybe you could start with each have a go at just telling us what's your novel, what's it about, and maybe how it fits into your writing career so far as well. Because like I think that I'm right in saying that these are debut novels, but these things don't come from nowhere. So yeah, if you'd like to tell us a bit about the books, that would be great. I don't know, Sylvia, would you like to go first?
Yeah, sure. I can talk a bit about Luminous. So, the book Luminous is set in a near future Korea, and it's basically it follows two estranged siblings who just haven't really talked to each other in many years. And one is a police detective, the other is a robot designer, but they kind of cross paths again because this criminal investigation kicks off and really traumatizes them, but also gives them a chance to really delve into their own sort of like mysteries of childhood. And that particular mystery revolves around the disappearance of their brother who was actually a robot. So Luminous is really, I think, focused on sort of like imagining our future and our relationship with robots, but is more kind of burrows deeper into what it means for robots to be part of our family. And that's where the book kind of delves deep. It's also started with that. Its inception was originally a children's book. I think I originally had sort of like a adventurous, rollicking story of like a bunch of kids finding a robot boy in a junkyard. And the reason why it became not very appropriate for children is because I thought about, I asked myself, where did this robot come from? Who is his family? Why was he thrown away? And that really kind of helped become the sort of entry wound for a much darker, but I hope ultimately a deeper and more hopeful story. And that became Luminous.
Oh, amazing. Thanks so much, Sylvia. It's really set up well some of the things that I hope we'll talk about in the conversation, like the idea of genre, that this could be like a children's book, but it's changed into something that's like, yeah, really like really complicated, textured, kind of speculative fiction, so much world building, and then this concept of family and children, and that's definitely something that I think we can pick up that'll cross over the two texts. Thanks so much for that introduction. Sierra, would you like to do something similar for Anibot?
Yeah, and let me also just say thanks. I'm really excited to be here. I was so honored that Chimera invited me to be involved, so thank you very much. And also, I'm really impressed, Sylvia, by that description of your book. Obviously, you've been describing it before, but I was trying to talk to my husband about what your book was about. And it was so intricate and layered that I really couldn't tease out the important things. So I love how you did that. Um, my book also has to do with family, but it's a much it's sort of a traditional relationship because it's a human man and a female robot. He designs or he buys a robot to create as his perfect girlfriend, and yet she also gets some sentience and she's autodidactic, so she starts teaching herself how to be more human. And ironically, the more human she becomes, the more complex the relationship becomes with her boyfriend, and he doesn't like that as much. So it's actually sort of a devolving of a relationship as she becomes more human-like. And to say she's human-like is already setting up a polarity between the two, like robot and human. And I think that actually there's this place where a robot, an AI companion, can become something that's just different that we've never experienced before. And I saw a lot of that in Sylvia's book too, because there are these hybrid creatures that they just transcend what we've thought of as robots or people before. I'm just really excited that these creatures are taking us someplace new, and we have to really think about different consciousnesses in a completely new way. And you did ask me to sort of tap this into my writing past. And although Anybot is my first adult science fiction novel, I have written young adult novels in the past that were science fiction. They were speculative future novels. So I kind of jumped from young adult to adult. And for me, that was really a shock when I was writing Anybot. Um, I didn't tell my family what I was working on at all. It was really uncomfortable to me. The book, the concepts of it, and the relationship and the sex in it were all like way off the charts for what I was used to writing. And it took me a long time before I was ready to sort of admit this was a book I was writing. I was afraid that my family would think I was a weirdo or really sick or something. And they still seem to like me. So I feel like I got away with it.
That is so interesting. Yeah. Well, do you just want to maybe talk a little bit then about like the way that genre kind of like moves between the in these texts, like between young adult and science fiction? Because yeah, like Sierra, I was struck by um the sex scenes in this book. They're very evocative, I thought. They're very well done. So good job. I think that you did excellent work there. Do you want to talk a bit about that kind of that move, and then maybe Sylvia could talk about, yeah, how she's kind of um use both of these modes.
I think it was really important. I mean, Doug buys Annie to be a sex robot, really. And that's the concept we understand about her, and that's why they put something about it on the cover of the novel. Um, and so it had to be there. And what's interesting to me is that sex can really be a power dynamic between people. And in some ways, she really celebrates sexuality because she's really good at it and she feels really positive about herself as a sexual creature. But he also uses it in many ways to debase her and dehumanize her as well. So, especially there's a really pivotal scene in the book where he's been really upset by her, and without giving too many spoilers, he really wants some revenge on her, and he finds this really terrible way to do it sexually that I haven't seen in any other kind of fiction before, where he sticks her in a closet and he subjects her to a situation that's really uncomfortable, and um, and it really sort of derails her sense of herself after that because she no longer has her sexuality as an important part of her. It's damaged. And I feel like that's a parallel for women or men who have been raped, who have been sexually assaulted in a way. So the book, it's it's complete in itself. It's like a capsule relationship with its own rules, but I feel like it really reflects what's going on in human relationships outside the book as well. And readers seem to be bringing a lot of their own experiences to the book so that they're
Mhm.
having different reactions or different interpretations of it too, which I find pretty interesting. So, how
Yeah.
about you, Sylvia?
Yeah, so one of the reasons why I'm so excited that we're able to talk together is because I feel like both Anibot and Luminous, we're really fascinated by this concept of power dynamics and labor, particularly because now that, it's funny because both Sierra and I wrote this book before ChatGPT has just made waves and swept into our lives. And I feel like the younger generations are just picking it up so quickly, but they're also picking up these AI chatbots in a way where they feel so freed from contributing emotional labor. Particularly, I've noticed like women or anyone who identifies as marginalized, they feel like being able to confide in AI companions means that they don't have to be so overly cognizant of thinking about, am I hurting someone's feelings? Am I being misconstrued? They feel liberated by that. And I think there's this question of, is that liberation, this unloading of emotional labor, a good thing, particularly for someone like, someone who's been socialized to always be cognizant of emotional labor for other people? Or is it possibly a destructive thing that we're socializing ourselves to be incredibly self-centered and callous and not considerate of other feelings, particularly because our relationships are becoming more mechanized? And I think that in some ways, what makes us so interesting with, depicting robots performing this sort of labor, whether it's emotional or sexual or physical, is that so many of these robots can be really childlike. And that's what I really enjoyed, especially about Anibot's depiction, this kind of paradoxical contradiction of Annie being so knowing, like she knows exactly, she doesn't feel shame towards sex in the way that human women are socialized to feel, but she's also very childlike in that she's curious, she's very open, the shamelessness, I think it's actually is what makes her feel childlike, because children learn shame, especially once puberty hits, and they learn, but the shame starts being social at a pretty early age. Like I'm reminded of, for example, how children from a young age love to do art, right? They love to just draw freely in art class and they just feel so liberated and they're just so happy. And then actually at a really remarkably young age, they start to compare themselves with their classmates and they start to learn shame. They start to learn that their work is not good enough. And that's when you see the loss of interest in art happen pretty early on. I think it's around like first grade, second grade. So shame itself is like it's a learned behavior. And that's why I think it's so funny that, Sierra, you and I both kind of come from, we were trying to write children's literature, or in your case, you wrote YA books, but then we took this jump into adult literature. But with it, I think we carried a lot of lessons we learned from writing about children or youths. And a lot of that is about how children can be liberated in certain ways that doesn't make them more immature, even though might make them more mature, but it also makes them, they can see things that as adults we're too myopic to pick up on, particularly in relation to power dynamics and relationships and this feeling we have towards shame and gender and femininity.
Mm, that's a really good point. It's a really good point.
You think that there's a kind of element here as well of thinking about, there's a lot of like pro-natalist kind of discourses as well about like what are the purpose of having children. So you've got someone like Elon Musk having like millions of children and yeah, there seems to be some kind of like political movement there. So do you think that there's something interesting about speaking about a child's position? Because yeah, you're right, we do get that. Oh, well, obviously, like yeah, Sylvia, your kind of text like circulates around a lot of children and the figure of what a child means to a family. And Sierra, yeah, Annie, you can read her as a kind of child because she's not as old as like her body would have you believe or whatever. So yeah, I wondered if you thought about that, about like what like the role of children in society and how that feeds into some of these issues that we're talking about. Oh, sorry, I didn't say who should go first.
No, I
Sylvia,
think
would you like to? Oh,
yeah,
yeah, sorry.
I think it's more relevant to Sylvia's book. I'm really fascinated by the character of Yo-Yo, and I love the idea of these kids that skip school to go out and play in the landfill, which is it's like a disaster landfill place. It's like so scary, and they're just like free and wild there. I just I keep seeing them there, and I don't know how to pronounce the name, the Ruijie. I don't know how to pronounce the
Rujay,
name. Okay,
Rujay.
she's she's I mean she's so appealing from the very beginning. You know, you really care about her, you really care about Yo-Yo. I mean, they've got Yo-Yo in the rabbit hutch, you know, to try to protect him at school. I just love what's going on with all those kids. And in other books, I know I'm talking too much, but other books, you know, there's this world of children that's just sort of a microcosm of what's happening for the adults. Like you think of, I don't know, To Kill a Mockingbird, and what happens at the school for Scout is just a mirror of what's going to happen with the adults. And yet the kids in the book are actually much kinder to each other than the adults are to each other in the book. So Sylvia, would you just talk a little bit about that and where you were going with that? It's just so fascinating to me.
Yeah, absolutely. First, I wanted to make a comment about Elon Musk and his techno harem. I feel like he wants children, but he doesn't want to be a father. And I think that's a very big difference because that kind of mindset is actually reflective of how people who are in sort of his position of power and privilege, it's like they don't see humans as humans, they see them as tools and products. And I fear that for him, having this multiplicity of children reflects that. He's just it reminds me of like how his first wife, his ex-wife, one of their big fights was she just shouted at him. She was like, "You can't treat me like I'm your employee, I'm your wife." And then he said, "If you were my employee, I would have fired you." And, and so it's that dehumanization we see, that late stage capitalism that we're starting to see and how it affects our relationships with each other. And I think that one of the reasons why I loved writing about children in Luminous is that they are remarkably protected from that. They're protected from that kind of capitalistic mindset, even though they're gradually feeling the pressures, particularly in a country like Korea. They would have felt so much of that pressure of, competition, studying. So yes, Sierra, I really just wanted to depict them skipping school, like that freedom. And I think part of the reasons why they skip school is that it's intermingled with sort of that existential fear that we're seeing a lot in the younger generations, where they're now asking themselves, what is the point of education? Like, what's the point of learning? What's the point of memorizing history or learning math when machines can do it for us? Machine can do it better. So I wanted to kind of tease out a little bit of that tension, but I also really just wanted to focus on for the kids that microcosm for me was a safe space. And
Mhm.
what I especially like writing about with the children's perspective is that I think of all the point of views in Luminous, the children's perspective is actually the darkest. In the children's perspective, we could see so much danger. It's like you said, they're just traipsing around in a very dangerous junkyard that's filled with, robots, and many of them not functioning, but many of them also quite functioning. So they're in a site of complete danger. There's so much darkness around them. And it's not that it's not like an inability to see that darkness because they're kids, but rather it's because they are able to shape the world the way they want. So they are able to draw hope out of this incredibly dark and dangerous world. And that for me is really the privilege of a child's imagination and what I was hoping to really depict with Luminous in that perspective.
Mm.
Yeah. Well, you got there. It's so cool. I mean, I read it months ago and I just keep thinking about it. It's just really good.
Yeah, I thought that was something interesting about the two texts, actually. Like, you're talking about, oh, well, one of you used a really good phrase a few minutes ago. Oh, Annie, Sierra, when you were talking about Annie Bot and you talked about like a capsule relationship. And I think that there's maybe something about this relationship between these children as well that you could map onto that. I wondered if you would want to say a bit about, yeah, the kind of like contrast maybe between like the close relationships or the family bonds or the relationship within the home in Annie Bot I'm thinking about there. and the wider world around it. Like, how did you kind of see it? Because the two books are quite contrasting on this one. I think that Sylvia, you've got this like kind of background of like a reunified Korea. It'd be really interesting to hear about like how that functions. Whereas Sierra, here we get like a smaller kind of canvas that occasionally we catch glimpses of what the wider world is like. So I don't know, Sierra, would you like to say something about that kind of almost claustrophobic kind of feeling
Yeah.
in your text?
Well,
Yeah.
if it's claustrophobic, that's good. That's what I was aiming for. I was writing the novel during the pandemic, so I myself felt like it was a very claustrophobic time, and I was sitting on my couch in my home with, my family around me, and we like were afraid to go outside. And I didn't set the novel during a pandemic, but to me it captures a lot of that feeling. And with every book, the environment actually is very much tied to the plot and to the characters, because people are responding to their environment or creating their environment through their actions and through their characters. And it was really pivotal for Annie and Doug to be stuck in this apartment together. He has hidden her existence from the world because he's ashamed of having her. So just that in itself is already really loaded. And so when his friend comes to visit their family, excuse me, sorry about this. I can hear I'm sort of scratchy. When Doug's best friend and former first first man comes to visit them, he brings this other element, and he's really a trigger for the situation, because he tells Annie that she can lie, and he gives her a situation so that she's got something to lie about, and that really has broken the connection between her and Doug, but she doesn't know about that. And one of the cool things for me is that that first chapter with Annie and Roland and Doug is an introduction to the reader of what the situation is, and it's also an introduction to Roland of what their situation is, and it's changing the situation. So the rest of the book follows after that. And um, what's interesting to me is that Annie doesn't understand the consequences or the repercussions of what she's doing at all. She, as you were saying before, she is childlike in some ways, and she's not sophisticated about how the world works. So by the later chapters of the book, she thinks back upon what happened at the first chapter, and she goes, "Oh, well, I mean, I didn't realize how that was going to affect Doug." And so then she has to keep a secret about it. And even later on, she realizes, well, even keeping a secret was something that was going to be a violation of trust. So the closeness and confined quality of the novel is really, it's just integral to what happens to the relationships. And then there become points when they burst out of the apartment and they're able to go up to a wilderness place, which I would say is a kind of a parallel, not to the junkyard, but it's an escape, like the junkyard is an escape from school. Going up to Lake Champlain is an escape from New York. And that wilderness there, that taste that you get that's away from the city and away from um, a kind of civilization, that place is a safety. And there you could think of the Call of the Wild with Jack London or something. Anytime anybody goes to the wild, it's a place of nature and rejuvenation and danger, and like simplification of what's the true meaning of life, or the true elements of life. So that's kind of a lot, but that's what was going on for me with the setting and the closed situation.
Mm, that's great. And Sylvia, would you like to talk a bit as well?
Yeah. I was thinking that I think when I actually read Annie Bot, I thought first the first person, the close, it was just so perfect for what we're seeing with a robot that is not only learning to expand her consciousness, but it just also suited so well with the way the story is a domestic, it's a domestic violent relationship. It's an oppressive, it's an abusive relationship. And one of the key traits we see with abusers is that they isolate, they literally entrap and then prevent their partner from reaching out to anyone, from realizing that there's an escape, that there's help and hope outside. So I thought it was just so surgically done, and being able to see her little glimpses where she actually realizes that she can step out of bounds was just very like, it was very titillating, not in a sexual way, but just a very like narrative way. And I think that it's funny because my book also has relationship between a robot and a person, but the gender is flipped because we have the owner is a woman and the robot is a man. But what makes it really tricky, particularly for this relationship, is so the owner is just as careless and selfish as the owner from Anibot, Doug. The owner in this book is it's Morgan, and she's I feel like, in a way, we were talking about how the robots are childlike, but also feel like when people are interacting with robots, they show a child simplicity in themselves too. And that's what I saw with the character Doug, where he just can't understand. He's just so baffled that he wants Annie to be one way, but then he gets angry when she becomes that way. And it's like a childlike tantrum about that. Like, how dare you be what I want you to be, but not what I need to be. And I feel like Morgan is very much the same way too. Like she creates this robot and does the same thing as Doug, which is that she models him after someone inappropriate and realizes now that she can't take him outside because now he looks like her favorite movie star, the most recognizable face in public. So it brings her so much shame
Yeah.
in like taking him out and acknowledging that she's in a relationship with a robot. And I think the extra step of shame for her is also that she created him. So she was the one who designed him to this perfection. But now she's ashamed to actually use the product, to use him as her boyfriend. And for Steven, who's the robot, he's just so confused. He doesn't
Yeah.
understand. Like, why was I created if I'm supposed to be a boyfriend, but you're too ashamed of me to be used as a boyfriend? And so I think that's why it's just so funny when we have these two characters. We actually see that with the robot and the owner, a lot of them, they just expose this arrested development because that's really the problem, I think, with these relationships between people and robots is the risk that these relationships just don't really progress. There's no emotional challenge. There's just this immediate resistance to grow, to understand, to sympathize. And that's really the trap that I think both our relationships, both Anibot and Morgan and Stephen Luminous, they fall into that.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting how Stephen becomes interested in trying to become a man. He feels like he needs to be more of a man to attract her. So that leads him into all kinds of trouble. It really does. And I had actually recently been really curious about these AI companions too. And I think it's what I've read lately is that it's over 20 million monthly active users are using character AI. And what's also interesting to me is that 2/3 of those users are ages 18 to 24. So they're young people, and like you were saying before, they have a facility with technology, so they're drawn to it, and it's easy for them to use. And I think that it's got to be really appealing in the first place to have a companion that's sort of in your control or meets your fantasy or is always nice to you. So I can see why people are drawn to that. And I think what it points to is that we have a lot of really lonely people. So we should be addressing that. It's just that someone is profiting on their loneliness by creating these things now. And I think after someone uses them for a while, there's going to become this point where they are less likely to look for human companionship because they've got this easy version of it on their computers or on their phones. And that in the long term could actually inhibit their growth, their human growth, to be able to have relationships with humans. So I do think it's really dangerous. And what I don't like especially is that corporations have recognized this loneliness and are finding a way to feed off of it and to profit from it. And I don't know what roadblocks we could set up or what safeties we could create to try to make people aware, because you know, as individuals, we have choices about how we want to spend our time and where we want to put our money. And so who am I to say, well, you shouldn't be, you shouldn't be having your AI companion. That's not my job, but there should be warning labels like there are on cigarettes or alcohol. So there should be some kind of way to warn people. And yet we don't have those because we don't know the long-term effects yet. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wonder if also kind of go circling back to what Anna, you were asking about, sort of like, the pronatalism, children dr sky plummeting birth rates, especially from where I am, which is Korea. I fear that this resistance to having children is just that immense fear of the unknown and of the growing challenges that I think many couples and families are facing right now, where they just look at the future and they just feel like it's so bleak. They think it's bleak because the economy is not in favor. There, it's just so hard to raise a family, to raise a child. They also feel like it's quite bleak because there's climate catastrophe that's, that's not just looming ahead, it's already here. And we have younger generations kind of just baffled by it. They're just looking at us and saying, you guys screwed up and now we're inheriting something really, really dire. And I think it's a if we bring in AI companions into the mix of it, just how tempting is it going to be for people to seek out these alternate relationships, these synthetic relationships that just seem like it will be much more safe and secure, and perhaps it won't be, it won't be so financially devastating to them to imagine having, say, AI companions or even AI children.
Mm, right. Well, we've had people that have pets already, but that somehow doesn't seem as dangerous, does it? As, the robot companion.
I don't know. In Korea, pet strollers now, outnumber the baby strollers sold. So, so it seems to, I don't know if we can easily argue that they're displacing them. I do think that the relationship we have with pets is actually quite, it might seem quite similar to the relationship you could have with robots, but the main difference though is that we're not actually responsible for our robots. Like we don't actually have to feel responsible for them. They're not dependent on us to live, to breathe, to feed. And as opposed to with pets, we are so responsible to them. We have to raise them. We have to always keep an eye on them in a way that I feel like robots are entirely in service of our needs, the way pets are not. Pets give us a lot of emotional support and joy, and they fill a lot of like, gas within us. But I don't think I think our relationship with robots is actually more dangerous because they're not teaching us things that, we imagine we want to teach children, such as responsibility, empathy, showing respect to another living creature.
Yeah, the thing is that also pets are really familiar to us, but I think that robots are going to become more familiar with us, especially AI companions. I think actual walking around robots that can interact in a way that seems human, I think those are still quite some way out. We don't have the biotechnology to link up with the electronic technology, but AI companions on computers, I think those are going to become more and more sophisticated. And then I'm not quite so sure I completely agree with you because once an AI companion has a sentience that approaches what Annie has, she seems alive to me. She has a consciousness that's not, it's definitely not a human consciousness, but it's a consciousness that's sensitive and growing and thoughtful and capable and merciful and generous. It has a lot of the qualities that I think of as human already. And I feel like Annie-bot deserves the respect that a fellow human does or that a dog does. I mean, it's not an accident that Doug also has a dog. There's like that's like a foil there. I mean, how does he treat his dog? Well, not any
Yeah.
better than he treats his robot, but he's not the most compassionate human in the first place. So I think we're going to enter a place where our machines will expect more respect. And the flip side of that is, what does it do to a human when you treat something like a machine? I mean, there are already humans that treat other humans like machines. And we're okay with that if it's actually a toaster. We're fine if you treat a toaster like a toaster. But when you're polite to your Siri or your Alexa, doesn't that make you feel better than when you're rude to your machine? I mean, there like we can train ourselves about how to be more polite and generous and kind, and we're practicing with our machines. So it really matters to us as humans how we treat our machines. It's so
Yeah,
fun
I
to
think
be
that
able to write about this stuff, isn't it? To like throw it into your fiction. Like, oh, I'll play this out in my book. I don't have to have the answers. I'll just propose all the questions.
yes, asking a lot of questions and then seeing how it's actually going to unfold in life. It's kind of scary that now we're
Oh
seeing a
yeah.
future where it might unfold. And I think that it's also scary how fast it escalated because I think
Mhm.
probably Sierra, when you and I were both writing this, we thought, no, it's still a ways off. Like it's quite far off.
Oh, absolutely. I'm far more frightened by my book now than I was when I wrote it in 2020. I mean, it's like, wow, I mean, it was so hypothetical. I felt like, it's really, and someone asked me what research I did for writing my book, and it's a good thing I didn't do a lot of research, because if I had tried to ground the book in what was happening with AI in 2020, I would have been so far behind. The book would have been so outdated by the time it came out last year. So it's a good thing I was just imagining, because now, like, it's really close. It feels really close.
Yeah, absolutely. But I suppose like one of the questions we're kind of circulating around here, well, there's kind of two things to me that are really interesting. One of them is I think the idea of like care and caring for other people and how that kind of is important and something that robots don't necessarily demand, but maybe they do. So that's something I think like how we look after each other is really important. But I suppose like the short, pithy way that I wanted to ask this question was maybe like, what does it mean to be real? Because for Annie Bot, she has this opportunity to lie, and that's kind of something that she holds on to. I don't know, Sierra, would you want to comment on that? And maybe Sylvia, you can think about what it means to be real and how robots help us to think about that.
I think that, wow, that you've really thrown me. Because I think the things around us are already real. We have such subjective realities in the first place anyway. There's so many people that don't believe things are real that seem really real to me. It kind of doesn't matter because what they think, because it's only what thing seems real to me, except when people vote. It's helpful if people can agree on what's real when they have to make large scale decisions as a mass of people. It'd be nice then if we could have a common reality. Back in my novel, Annie feels real to me. She has posed the question of how to become a real person or how to become a real woman by Doug, but his idea of what a real woman is not the same as hers. So I'm just sort of, I guess I can't actually answer your question. I can just kind of work around it, but maybe Sylvia's got a better idea.
No, this is why, as writers, we ask questions, but we don't necessarily spoon feed the answers. I think that I think this is also why I'm so drawn to writing speculative, because, like Sierra, I don't think any of us have a shared reality. We all have different realities with different rules in them. And isn't that in some way sort of the definition of a speculative? Like when we think about it, for example, dystopian is often associated with science fiction, with speculative fiction. But I think so many of us could now argue that we're living in a dystopian reality. So how do you differentiate the dystopian in our current and our present day versus the dystopian we imagine in the future? And how do we also reconcile with the fact that these dystopians were realities for many people in other countries for many, many years, that we were able to just kind of close our eyes off of and feel safe within our own reality? Isn't that in some ways like the definition of the brave new world, where we're able to kind of like, just like siphon ourselves away from the dystopian realities of others. And then I think about the fact that now, like whenever I talk to my friends, we're always so grateful that we didn't grow up in the age of social media, that we weren't raised in that age, because I just can't imagine how fragmented our reality might be, like our sense of reality, because
Right.
we have so many generations, younger generations, who have grown up in screens. They've grown up locked away in a world that has no basis in reality, that is just these pixels and gigabytes. And it's when I think about that, it's just so like that feels completely speculative in a way that I think now, like a lot of science fiction novels must feel so quaint when we're trying to portray like, a virtual reality or whatnot. It's just so much more overwhelming, the reality we exist in right now. But when we go back to that question of, what is real, I think another, particularly with, books about robots, we're really asking them, are they sentient? Do they have consciousness? Are they worthy? Or in some ways, if we want to get religious, or to borrow religious terms, we're asking, do they have a soul? And I think it's just so fascinating that, people have been asking this question, do you have a soul? Do we have a soul? For centuries, even before we were thinking about, it's like Descartes talking about, I think, therefore I am. It's this question of, do I exist in mind or do I just exist in body? Do I exist in physical self or the metaphysical self? And I think our relationship with robots is so fraught with that. But now what I realize is that I don't think many of us are going to care. As in, there's not going to be like a universal basis where they just suddenly decide robots are real, robots are sentient. Rather, it's going to be such an on an individual basis. Some of us will feel that robots are real, that they are sentient like us, they have feelings like us, or think, or maybe they think and feel in ways that are alien to us, but deserve, respect or understanding. But I do think there are going to be many, many others who also are happy to dehumanize and objectify robots the way they do with fellow humans.
Yeah.
Well, I think there's an argument that has been made that like citation needed, but that yeah, if you've got like bots like Anibot, for example, that you're allowed to treat however which way you want, it also makes a difference to how you treat other human beings then. So yeah, I don't know how much that's kind of reflected in the text or something we might want to think about, but that like and arguably even if those robots aren't real, then it's still like a good thing to treat them correctly because otherwise it's damaging to you. Is that something that you guys have thought about?
Yeah, that's exactly it. I think it's really corrosive to a person if they let themselves sink to their absolute lowest. And one of the things that happens for Doug and Annie is that we see him through her gaze in private, where he is able to indulge the worst qualities in himself. People who observe him out in public see a very different person than who he is in person, in private. So I think sometimes there's a duality of how people are, where they're lazy at home, or they're sometimes they're their best versions at home, but sometimes some of us relax at home and we're not trying too hard. And then we go out there and we have a social presence that's more tolerable. So I think that's out there. I think we need to have. It helps when we have some notion of how to treat each other in public when we interact with people. I think it's great when people can be a little nicer to each other, even if it is a formality, because I think we could build on that. And I think it's our disconnection from people that is causing us to have so many other problems. It taps back to what Silvia was saying, that there are a lot of people that have been raised on social media now, but even beyond that, all of us are connected to our phones. We've become hybrid computers already. Every time, I wake up in the morning, it's like the first thing I do is pick up my phone, and I'm not alone in that. So we've given our photographic memories to our phones. We've given our memories of our what's supposed to happen in the future. We've given our ways to communicate to our phones, and that's why we have to carry them around with us in our pockets. And if you've ever had, if you've been outside cell service or your phone has run out of batteries, you feel bereft. It's like a part of you is missing, and that's sad, right? But that's reality. That's where we are. So I'm kind of wandering a bit, but we're already these hybrid creatures, and we also need to try to be nice to each other. So I hope we can be somehow. And also, not to diss technology too much, the reason we're able to have this conversation is because somebody came up with Zoom. And I'm really grateful that we've got people from around the world who are able to talk to each other. So this would have been impossible otherwise. And I'm grateful to it.
It's
Right,
like
right.
one
Yeah.
isn't it? Sorry, Sylvia, go on.
No, I just love how it's like, so I was traveling recently, and then when you travel, your eSIM, your data is so spotty. And then there was a period where my data just died, and I just felt so disconnected. I mean, not only was I really angry about not having Google Map. It's just so amazing how easily we can get lost without that navigation. But I felt disconnected in that I didn't know whether messages were coming in or going out, and just how much we actually depend on messaging to keep up and preserve a lot of our relationships that are often divided by time and location. And that's also actually a privilege. Like in the past, our friendships were so constrained to who lived within your radius. But now actually we're able to still preserve and cultivate friendships through texts, through phone calls, and it just feels like we have this sort of wonderful kind of access toward each other. But of course, like too much of one thing can't always be a good thing. But to kind of circle back to what we were talking about with just like I'm starting to lose my train of thought. But what I wanted to say about the relationship that we have between robots, one of the changes I think, one of the conscious decisions I made in Luminous is I chose not to write from the perspective of the robot. So the perspectives in the book are entirely human, and it's very one-sided in some ways. And I think that's why this, this concept that Sarah you brought up about the private versus public is just so interesting because yes, like we have a private self, and in some ways, our computer, our machine is privy to that private self in a way that no human is. So what does if that computer then could talk back to us and was actually seemed to have its own personality, like what does that mean when this concept of private versus public blurs so horribly and that we have this other creature, this other intelligence that has seen our worst side, the sides, our Google searches that we would never want anyone to see, including the FBI. But it's just so like it makes me think about what does that mean for us to have these relations with robots? How is it going to change intimacy in ways that we can never really replicate with, humans? Because I think it's quite rare to have relationship with people where you'd be willing to kind of just let them log into your computer and your phone without any sort of like worry or concern or thought. Because privacy is just so integral to also cultivating our sense of self. But with machines, we're surrendering that. And I think that's why that's where a lot of the fear and distrust sometimes appear in my book, where these characters just realize these robots have know everything about me, but do I really know anything about them? Do I really know how they're thinking, how they're feeling? Like they are a black box. They are a mystery. And that mystery can either drive them to be more curious, to want to find out what this robot is really capable of, or alternatively, it can have people be really afraid of this robot, to fear that they've been tricked, that they've been manipulated, that they've surrendered themselves to an intelligence that they have no way of understanding.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think we're approaching that. We've got these intelligences we can't understand, and we only have what we have. We have this human human ability, and we are comfortable with things that mirror the way we think, and that's why it's so surprising for us and difficult for us when we are faced with something that thinks in a different way.
Mhm.
Again, great material for science fiction because you could have things think like an octopus, right? Or the ants. There are those books out there with all these different ways of thinking.
Yeah,
So, Anna, can I just ask you something back? Are you a writer as well? You said you're a professor, but are you writing as well?
oh, I do research on science fiction and currently traumatic pregnancy. That's what I work on. So I don't write fiction, but I write like academic
What
writing.
kind
And
of
I'm very
what
interested in everything we're talking about. Yeah.
what kind of pregnancy did you say?
A traumatic pregnancy and its
Traumatic pregnancy.
representation in science fiction. But I've written about cyberpunk before, and that's kind of what my main book is about. So thinking about these issues about the kind of the cyborg or the like the gap between the human and the robot, that's yeah, something that's kind of been my bread and butter and really interesting to hear what you're talking about, especially like I really like what we've been circling around this kind of like tension between the familiar and the unfamiliar. And Sylvia, what you just said there about like the way that you treat your phone, I'm thinking that when we tell it everything, it's an extension of like our consciousness, basically, yeah. But then when you're like, oh, it's a black box though as well. It's so funny that kind of that way that like there's us and our consciousness and the machine, but then it's also like a corporate product and it's something that that we are actually engaged with the outside world. So there's this like really interesting issue of interface here, I think that's and that comes up again in what Sierra said about the public and the private. And like we're kind of coming to the end. So in a minute I'm going to ask you about like, oh yeah, next steps and things like that. But maybe when this is a kind of like selfish question from me to Sierra that just when we're talking about that public-private thing, do you think Doug is a normal person or is he particularly repellent? And this is just the way that you like that people maybe behave in pub
Mm,
in private, or have you got thoughts on that?
I think there are a lot of people like Doug out there. I think there are. I think a lot of us are selfish. I think a lot of us are confused and lonely. So I don't want to blame him for how he is. I think he's a creature of our society. I think he's familiar to people because they recognize him too. And women who are in relationships with someone like him, they recognize that relationship. They're like, this is just so familiar. He feels entitled. He feels like he should be able to be in charge. He feels like he's masculine. He feels like he should be able to be macho. He feels like women should serve him. He feels like he should have his sexual needs gratified all the time, whenever he wants. He feels like he should make money. He feels like he should have a good job. He feels like he should have a nice, beautiful place to live. He feels like he's entitled to all that just because he exists, just because he's a white guy in our society, and all of the systems around him have set him up to be the guy who's in charge. He's not actually in charge. He doesn't actually have the things that make a life meaningful to him. He's incredibly lonely. He's got a failed relationship. He's distant from his parents. He doesn't have any friends. He doesn't have any hobbies. In fact, all the things that could make his life rich do not belong to him at all. And Annie is the one who could provide them, because she's she's open. She's just open. She's open to learning, and
Mm.
he's not. So I do think he's real. I think there are a lot of people like him, and I think they're a creature of what he's. I think that our society has been training men to be like Doug. And I
Mm.
think that's why I couldn't flip the book Annie bought. I think for this book, for it to work, unlike Silvia's, where Stephen is the robot, for this book to work in America right now, it needed to be Annie as the woman and Doug as the man.
Mm. And that issue of like connection, disconnection we're talking about as well. The last thing we want is these dogs all finding each other online and forming incel communities and things like that, right? There's like, yeah, the upside and the downsides of connection here, like really clear from thinking about these texts. Um,
Yeah.
Sylvia, I don't know if you've got any final thoughts or if you'd like to tell us what next. Have you got plan? I know it must be so annoying that you just brought a book into the world and immediately everyone's like, right, what are you doing now? But yeah, would you like to share anything where we could wrap up?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that since what Sierra was talking about, this question of how has patriarchy, especially within the context of late stage capitalism, victimized so many of us, including these men who seem like they now expect things. They feel so inadequate when they don't get those things. And I think about, and that's why I feel like that's something that's been really on my mind, even when I was writing Luminous, and now with this next project, it's something that I want to work with a bit more closely, because I think Luminous, if it swims in those waters, but now I'm hoping it goes a bit deeper with this next project. So my next project is going to be about, it's going to be about mermaids, and again, I'm just again fascinated by looking to alternate lives and intelligence to see what are we getting wrong within ourselves, what are we missing, and I think so. These mermaids are very much modeled off of cetaceans, like killer whales and whales, and I just think that I'm always just so fascinated by the fact that these orcas and whales are often matriarchal. And and what does that mean? What does the matriarchy mean within the context of nature versus like, the way matriarchy is, it's harder to sustain in among the human world. And so that's really what I'm like now really focused on, writing about matriarchal man-eating mermaids.
Oh my gosh, so exciting. Thank you, Sylvia. And Sierra, do you want to share anything about your future plans?
No, I'm working on something speculative too, but I'm not really ready to talk about it. I'm just so intrigued by these mermaids, and I just also want to say, much as we've talked about people feeling lonely or isolated, it's the books that help people connect. You know, when you read something, you feel so connected. If it's well done, you feel so connected to the characters that you feel understood. You feel like you are friends. Like I'm friends with Yo-Yo. I'm friends with Morgan. You know, I know those people. So it makes me feel like I know Sylvia too, because I know her creatures. And I've felt that even before I've had this chance to talk to you, Sylvia. So I feel like that connection. So I think when we create books, we're creating connections, and I think that's what we really need. And I want to just tip my hat again to Chimera, because when you have a conference like you do, a festival like you do, you bring like-minded people together, and we have a chance to get to know each other. So thank you for that.
Oh my
It's been
gosh.
an honor.
couldn't have ended it better myself. Thank you so much, both of you, for a fascinating conversation. Thank you to everybody for watching, and I hope everyone enjoys the rest of the festival. And thank you to Sia and Sylvia. I wish we could give you an in-person round of applause, but this will do for now. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much.